Hey everybody, welcome to Campus Comics Cast, coming to you from Carbondale, Illinois, with special guests from the Campus Comics crew. And now, here's your host, the man with the previews in hand, Mike No.
Hello and welcome to another bonus episode of Campus Comics Cast. I'm Mike No, the owner and operator of Campus Comics here in Carbondale, Illinois, and as always, we're coming to you from inside the store on a cool November night.
Trademark.
Trademark, that's right. That's right. I've been told that is one of the things I say every time, so why stop now, right? So anyway, we're just going to be talking about, we're going to do a couple of podcasts tonight. One of them not so pleasant, and the other one we're just going to, talk, just have a good conversation about various topics. So we'll be looking for a couple. Yeah, it'll be good. Just a little sad. But joining me tonight to do this is
Scott Reed,
Dan Brown, and really special guest.
Super special guest.
extra special,
yeah,
Mike Atchison.
That's right. You may remember, if you've been with us all along, Mike did a number of episodes with us, anywhere from 1 to 3, depending on who you talk to. I guess we need to go back and listen to him and realize how many it is. But he's in for the Thanksgiving holiday, so that gives you an idea when we're recording this. So just let's get the band back together and do a podcast with Mike since he has the opportunity. So we're glad to have you here, Mike.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
You've seen how quick I responded to your invitation.
Yes,
yes, I'm in.
Yes, I'm in. So, well, what we're talking about today, of course, a lot of times we'll do these special podcasts or, the bonus podcasts, and one of the topics we talk about is, someone within the industry we've lost that's passed away. We've talked about Gary Friedrich, Ramona Fraden, Norm Brayfogle, Marie Severin, all these come to mind. But just within the last week was probably, the biggest one I can imagine happened. Is of course we lost Stan Lee, right, at age 95. So since Mike was here in town, and that happens, Scott was just like, "You want to do a podcast about Stan Lee?" And of course, we would be remiss not to. So, I don't know where we even start about this, but I can't really think as far as for me, because I was born in 1961, which is the year the FF #1 came out. So that was actually the beginning of the Marvel age of comics. So I'm more of a DC reader, but also, there's no way I was around during the dawn of that. You know what I mean? I was reading this stuff when it was, the cutting edge, and it was in its, prime of what was going on with Stan. And one of the things that always strikes me about when you look at Stan Lee and any of his collaborators, co-collaborators, is the thing that's just amazing is you think, Bob Kane and Bill Finger, who's been credited, known for one thing, Batman. Siegel and Schuster, known for one thing, Superman. What's the guy who created Wonder Woman?
William Marston.
Yeah. Known for one thing. Well, that and the lie detector.
Yeah. Some other things we won't
get into. Personal history thing. He didn't invent that, though. He just exploited it.
Yeah, he just jumped on that bandwagon. Right? But so that's the thing. It's just amazing. It's like when you think of these legendary comic book creators, usually there's one thing that they've created that they're known for, one or two. But if you look at Stan, and what he had a part of creating, as far as Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Daredevil, on and on, Silver Surfer, Galactus, just all these characters. It goes on and on.
Ravage 2099.
I was talking about that Saturday.
Yeah.
That's what he was going to talk about today. But it's just incredible that it, what was it, like 5-6 years period, and all these characters, Stan and either Steve Ditko, Jack Kirby, all these guys, they all came out within a short period of time, and they're still going on, and
now are multi-billion-dollar properties.
Right. So just his impact on the industry and on pop culture in general, as a measure. The other thing I think Stan did that took it to another level was the fan interaction.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
You know, he kind of started that whole thing, you know, with his letters pages, and you'd always see him out there. And he it didn't take long till he was really bigger than just the comic book industry. You know, he was a big personality and just was really out there. I mean, as a kid growing up in the 70s, I'll just never forget, you know, my two worlds colliding. You know, I remember pictures of Stan Lee taken with Kiss, my favorite band at the time, you know what I mean? Because he was just part of pop culture. He was, you know what I mean? He was just everywhere, and it's just...
Just the other day, I saw on YouTube, John Favreau's old show for IFC, Dinner for Five, is on there, and it was a special episode hosted by Kevin Smith where Stanley talks about that experience and going to the printers to put the blood in the ink. And he's got a pretty good story about that.
Yeah.
So, but that's on YouTube. You can check that out.
Okay, I'll have to do that. For those of you who don't know, one of the first time Kiss appeared in a comic book, well, the second time actually, because that was in Howard the Duck, in case anybody wants to know, for Kiss's first appearance. But they did this magazine-sized special where supposedly they added blood to, you know, the red ink, and it printed the comic with that, and pictures of, you know, Stan there as they're pouring the vials in, you know, the ink at the printing plant. So don't be scraping those comics for DNA to try to clone or anything.
Pretty thin.
It probably won't work. So I mean, as far as Scott, what, you know, your first...
Well, just like you, I have like two, I guess, early memories of Stan Lee. Like the first is just from reading letter pages. By the time I had started, you know, reading comics, he was more the editor-in-chief role as opposed to the writer. A lot of the writing duties had been handed off to other writers, but he was obviously very present in all those books and the letter pages and you know, with the, like, you know, he did all the FOOM and the No Prize, right, was one of the big things that I remember younger. But then the other thing that I really remember, this is probably what's most ingrained in my mind, is that he would do like the Excelsior at the end of like Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. So he would be the narrator for the beginning and end of those cartoons, and that made him at that point a much larger than life character for me. So yeah, that's my earliest recollections of Stan Lee.
Well, mine's pretty much the same as Scott's because I was born way later than these guys. But, you know, we've talked before about doing an episode about, like, our first comic books. I can't tell you what my first comic book was because when I was you know, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends was on when I was, like, 2 or 3 years old. And I remember Stan Lee narrating this. And I know my first few comics I got were Spider-Man because of this show. They've been lost to the wind, and you know, one will turn up now and then. But yeah, like Stan Lee's narration of that show is really kind of my first exposure to him and this kind of larger-than-life personality. And he had left Marvel to go to Hollywood to shop these properties around, and this is, you know, one of the things that resulted from that. And, you know, I'm a DC guy, but it's like Stan Lee still has an influence, either just through competition, if nothing else. And like I had heard stories for years where, you know, they were in competition, but Stan Lee would meet with Carmine Infantino every week when he was editor of DC. And while we were getting ready for this episode, I'm like, oh, I need to find something that talks about that. So I had always assumed it was they met at a diner or a deli or something over lunch. Turns out they were having cocktails at the Friars Club because they were both members. That's what the meetings were, apparently. But yeah, he's just had a huge impact on the industry. You know, I don't care what you're into. Stan Lee, you know, affected somebody that you like or something. You know, his influence is pretty far-reaching, and it will be. But yeah, that's kind of my first exposure to Stan Lee.
So, Mike, you're pretty much strictly as you grew up and everything, your exposure was, what was it, your grandfather? Or
my uncle.
Your uncle would bring you comics, but he always happened to bring you DC comics.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he was trying to create bias or what it was, but my uncle worked at Sparta Printing, which is 20 miles from where I lived, and every month or two he'd bring my brother and me a stack of comics, and there were never any Marvels. I didn't even really, at that age, even recognize there were two big companies. It wasn't until later. Probably my first Marvel character that I read, or book that I read, was the Treasury-sized edition of Superman versus Spider-Man. And I can still see that Jose Luis Garcia Lopez cover. And I remember as I got older, I delved into when I could get my hands on one, or maybe just the odd one came my way. But like Scott said, what I really gravitated to, I was reading these. What was so different from DC was that Stan Lee, the publisher, the editor in chief, the embodiment of Marvel, was speaking directly to fans every issue of every comic I've seen, and he had these. I mean, he spoke on a level like he was really talking to you, and that made me put me both in awe and jealous, because I was, my DC was. I mean, I'm probably the most DC guy here, and I recognized they were a bunch of stodgy, stuffy old suits.
Yeah, it was much more formal from DC than it was from Marvel.
Yeah. And I was like, what the heck? So I as I got older, I learned more about Marvel when I started buying back issues, and I would pick up things. And I've read lots of Stan Lee, or at least a few Stan Lee stories, but nothing like what you guys have experienced. But I recognize this man as a pioneer and I've heard other people say, people were texting, and this happened to me. People were texting me, family and friends, saying, "Oh my gosh, Stan Lee died." How many comic personalities, comic creators, can we say that about? That you're getting random texts from people, friends and family, saying this man has passed, and what he meant to the industry going back to the 40s. And I love the history of comics as much as I love comics, I think, and knowing how he grew into the industry and then hit that magic spot in 1961 with Fantastic Four. It just warms my heart. What we would be without him, I don't know.
Yeah. And that was at a point where he was about, you hear all the stories. He was ready to leave the comic book industry in 1961 after writing Fantastic Four. And I guess we should credit his wife, Joanne, right? Joan. I'm sorry, Joan. Yeah, with giving him the reason to write the story he wanted to read
his way.
Yeah, do it. If you're done, write your story and then be done. At least you knew you gave it 100%, and then that just really turned an industry completely around.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I was really interested to know in the 50s, which was, everybody knows, was the Wortham, and then superheroes took a back seat. But Atlas was struggling. Atlas was what Timely
right.
turned Marvel. But in the 50s, it was Atlas, and pretty much the only employees of that company was Martin Goodman, the owner, and his cousin by marriage, Stan Lee. And they were trying to ride the tide of whatever was important or faddish at the time, whether it was romance, and then they switched to Western, and then they switched to horror, and then
monster
then
books.
They switched to the Kaiju. Is that how you say it? Kaiju?
Kaiju.
Monsters. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it comes full circle after that fateful golf outing.
Yes.
That Martin and Leibowitz.
Rumored.
Yeah, Fable,
that may
rumored,
be apocryphal. That may be apocryphal. Yes.
Right, yeah. I even actually wrote that in my notes because it sounds so good. I'm like, well, this is
a great story.
It's probably, who knows? But it led to Stan Lee taking that germ and capitalizing on it and making the Fantastic Four what Justice League. That's my title, but. If you read those early ones, it's Gardner Fox, and my Lord, there's nothing that can be drier than a Gardner Fox story. The guy's very formulaic. Not taking any credit away from him or Mike Sekowsky, but when you read those old Fantastic Four with Lee and Kirby,
for sure.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was DC's approach, and that's what Marvel, I think, too, people that aren't familiar with the history of comic books don't realize just the impact that Marvel did have, because it was a totally different approach to superhero storytelling. Because, you mentioned that the editorial people at DC were stodgy, suits and things like that, whereas, Stan Lee was, talked to us like we were sitting across the table from him. But that was their approach to storytelling, too, that Stan brought. It's just like he humanized these types of characters. DC always treated their superheroes more like gods, whereas...
or authoritarian figures.
Right, yeah. Exactly.
Super dad.
Yeah. So, whereas Stan Lee and Marvel created human people that had these powers. To see the superhero, instead of Superman and Batman teaming up, and all, blah, 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 all this stuff, to see superheroes fighting each other not because they hated each other, but because they were a family. And, you know, you're part of a family, you know what it's like to have, you know, sibling arguments. And they brought that, you know, to this medium, which was unthought of.
And he brought flawed characters, or characters that had some type of a flaw. You know, Peter Parker was the unpopular kid. Daredevil was blind. You know, Tony Stark had he could die any time from that shrapnel near his heart.
That's later.
And that was, the DC versions were basically invulnerable, and
above reproach.
Yes, exactly.
I was trying to figure out why, or maybe it's both good and bad. But by the time I was old enough to understand sophisticated writing, and there was more to it than the Silver Age and early Bronze Age. I was a teenager when New Teen Titans came out in 1980. I was 13, 14 years old. And all of a sudden, that clicked with me, and I'm thinking, then I realized that's the kind of writing that was going on, or much earlier at Marvel, when I didn't really get a chance to see it until my early teens with Wolfman and Perez.
Yeah. Another thing that Marvel did that DC did not is set their stories in real locations too, which kind of humanized them too, but also because DC was Metropolis or Gotham City or Central City, something like that, whereas Marvel was mostly New York.
You could see on the panel and go to that place.
But that also led to the fact all these characters in New York are in New York. Why aren't they running into each other?
Yeah,
so they were.
Yes,
yeah, exactly. And sometimes it'd be this one little throwaway panel where they just Spider-Man swinging by, or you see Thor in the air,
or Thor buzzes by Spider-Man when he's swinging. And stuff like that.
So it was just really just totally different approach to it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Both have their merits. Both are great. I love them both, but. Marvel, it was different. It was cutting edge, at the time. You don't realize how different it was. Again, people that have had this all their life, which is me included in that, don't you kind of take that for granted and figure that's just all the way it was, whereas you can go back and read those golden and early Silver Age stories and realize it was not that way.
Right.
So,
did you know I read this just recently.
Just for extra credit.
Just for extra credit. Stan Lee drew a bigger crowd at colleges that he spoke at than I think it was former President Eisenhower at the time.
Oh, really?
He was in the 60s in the colleges. He was the bomb.
That's something. So the other thing, what we'd be totally remiss, especially in this day and age, is what would be going on in Hollywood right now if it wasn't for Stan Lee's creations. You know what I mean? It's just like these movies. I
got to throw in there Lee and Kirby. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. He had his, co-collaborators. That,
Kirby, Ditko for the big two. Right?
Absolutely. So, So, not taking anything away from those guys at all. But, without the influence of Stan Lee and his collaborators, which, carried a lot of the weight for a lot of times when Stan was being editor and stuff like that. But, I don't think anybody can really argue that the major trend and what's bringing the most money into Hollywood and out of Hollywood as far as, impacts as far as employment and, and just the box office take and all this stuff, that, is the superheroes and Marvel at the forefront of that. We have multiple movies that have made over $1 billion. Wasn't Infinity War the first to reach $2 billion?
I don't know if it was the first.
It depends on how long you go.
Okay.
And then you got to worry about inflation and stuff like that.
Right, yeah.
So,
it's up
but
there.
hey, I'll take it.
Oh, yeah, for
I'll take that money.
Yeah.
I won't quibble over a few million.
Yeah.
Right.
I'll take 1% of that money.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. So,
but now you have other movie studios trying to ape this and create their own universes. And I don't think anyone. First off, no one's done it as successfully as they have, and you've seen some kind of false starts with it, where Universal keeps trying to get something going with their monsters.
Right.
You had the Dracula Untold a few years ago, which I think is an all right movie. It didn't lead into a universe like they wanted, and then they had this dark universe kind of thing that was kind of another false start with The Mummy. I think it was last year. And it's just like, Marvel's figured it out.
Yes.
And again, this is the Marvel Studios, before Disney's involvement and everything, they made their own movies and they figured, they broke the code for that.
Yeah, and the other thing too, and I mean, I can't really credit Stan or any of the collaborators with that, was just the absolute turnaround. I mean, it was what, in the 80s, 90s,
Oh,
Marvel
yeah.
was bankrupt.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
they
that-
were
and
owned
that's-
by a toy
And just
company.
back
you
to
know?
movies, like there's a long time Marvel couldn't make a good movie.
yeah.
Oh yeah, for
I'm-
sure.
You know, people rag on DC, but Marvel's made some real stinkers with their
Yeah.
films.
Everybody wants to credit Marvel, but I mean, I am of the, you know, I mean, or wants to be super critical of some of these movies, you know,
Yeah,
mostly DC. But, you know, my generation, the best I could get was the Lou Ferrigno Hulk TV
Yeah,
show.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right,
So,
yeah.
you know, that was about the best as good as it got there for a
Yeah.
while. So we need to count our luck, you know, our blessings or whatever that we get the movies that we get now.
No one's
so.
nostalgic for the Spider-Man made-for-TV movies where he's shooting rope.
Yeah,
You know?
or just crawling around the wall for no reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so strange. Or the Doctor Strange movie. Did it ever get aired? The old TV Doctor Strange movie?
It did.
Yeah, couldn't tell you anything about it.
Side Mystery Science Theater story on that one.
Uh-huh.
I heard a podcast where the guy that used to screen the movies for that show, they desperately tried to get that on Mystery Science Theater. Marvel didn't want it out there, so they shut him down every time. They just didn't want to admit that had ever happened.
Right.
But yeah, and there was a home video release of it. I know it was on tape for a while.
Okay.
I don't know if it's ever made it to DVD. I kind of doubt it.
Right, I would think not.
But I think
so,
if you scour enough, you can probably
Yeah, you
find
can probably
it.
find it if you looked hard enough.
Right.
So.
So, okay, so is there anything else anybody else wants to talk about, Stan, or other
I'm
than
sure
our-
we could all go on and on
Right,
and on.
yeah,
So it's just a matter of how long you want to talk about it. So.
Right. So, because the other thing we want to do is talk about our favorite Stan Lee written story. So, are we ready to go on to that portion?
I think we're good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
I think
go
we're
right,
good.
go right ahead.
All
so.
right, well,
go,
I
you
ca-
go,
I
you go,
kinda
no,
feel
no, you
bad.
go, you go.
Have you got one?
I can make up something.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll come up with my number two choice, I
Okay,
guess. So.
Believe us when we say this is not scripted, because we sat down here and say, you know, Scott said his story and was like, oh, I was going to do that. So he's gracious to do that. Well, the story I want to talk about, you know, and it is one of my favorite stories, but I think it's also one of the most influential and important stories that came out of the Silver Age, at least in my opinion, is a Fantastic Four issues 48 through 50, whatever you want to call it, the Galactus Saga, the
Yeah.
Galactus Trilogy, whatever you want to call it. People call it different things. But issue 48 is the first appearance of the characters, Silver Surfer and Galactus, and, you know, two more creations of, you know, Jack and Stan. Yep. And to me, just, I don't know what it is about that story. I think it's just the groundbreaking nature of it, just the scope of it. It was like a prototype for so many stories, or the archetype, I should say, of so many stories that have come since then.
That story introduced Marvel Cosmic. You know, I mean,
Yes,
that's
right.
where we really get the origins of Marvel Cosmic. So,
the cosmic
Guardians of the
stuff.
Galaxy ultimately comes out of, you know, Fantastic Four 48 and 49 and 50. So,
Right. So the whole upshot of the story is, you know, the sky. You look out at the sky over the New York skyline. It's all just fire. Is all you can see. And then the Watcher shows up and reads. I haven't read it recently, but doesn't the Watcher show up and reads the lab and
something along that
stuff?
line. Yeah, I haven't
stuff
read it
happens.
recently either. But.
Yeah, and then does away with, you know, the fire, which is just an illusion created by the Watcher, and it's just basically all you see is space junk. So you find out the Watcher's trying to shield the Earth from being spotted by the Silver Surfer, who is the herald of Galactus. You know, he goes out to find worlds for Galactus, the planet devourer, what the, you know, planet eater, whatever you want to say, to come and consume.
Devourer of worlds.
Devourer of worlds. There you go. And the thing that's really unique and different about this story to me is it's really the first time a villain is introduced. It's truly not a villain. It's not evil.
Right.
He's hungry.
Force of nature.
Yeah.
You know, he's just a force of nature. And that was the way that Stan and Jack thought, is what are we going to do that's different? We have to do something big. So basically, I think their inspiration was really biblical in nature. You know what I mean? It's just like, what's something that's so powerful, you know, that doesn't even take into account Earth as being important enough to conquer. It's just his next meal.
Right.
You know, so just the thoughts of that, you know, just a different, unique approach to that kind of stuff. The back and forth, you know, and then the Watcher, who is more than a watcher in this story, right? He's not just
Watcher is always more than just a watcher.
True.
That's something my uncle told me when I was very young, and he's never been proven wrong.
right. Always tinkering, even though he's not supposed to. But anyway, just through the course of that, you know, and just the resolution that's come, you know, I believe the Watcher amps up Johnny's power enough to he can go back to the home world and get the ultimate this weapon that, you know, that he shows to Galactus, and Galactus says, okay, I'll spare the Earth if I just can take that back.
Yeah. Well, Reed Richards is the one that sticks it in his face, right? And, and that's enough to, it's a bluff, you know, it's kind of like a MacGuffin in a story, but still, you know, it's there. So,
but that always struck me too, you know, here's this hugely powerful being, he's giant, probably, he's not as big as they draw him now, you know, but probably
it fluctuates, you know, their depiction.
But I just always, I don't know, the visual was struck of that because this weapon he holds up is just this little tiny thing, you know, and just like that's enough for Galactus, you know, to move on. And during the course of this whole story, you know, he strands Silver Surfer on Earth, takes away his power cosmic, or most of it.
He ties him to Earth.
Ties him to Earth, basically.
There you go.
Yeah.
And so, you know, so now, you know, Silver Surfer's become, and that's another theme that we see a few times in some Marvel stories, you know, is the guy that's come to destroy comes to intercede for it, you know, almost becomes like a Christ-like figure in that. So anyway, that's my statement for my favorite Stan Lee story. Just not only for the story itself, but the influence it had.
You were gonna say something.
I was gonna say, where's that reprinted? Do you know what collection that might be found in?
It's been reprinted multiple times. Any FF like the Marvel Masterworks, it's in there. They just did a True Believers for FF 48, but not 49 and 50.
Yeah,
right.
I think it's in one of the Epic collections. They collect those three.
And I think there was that big giant-sized Galactus thing that just came out. I'm pretty sure it's in there. I mean, I assume it is. I'd have to double check and see, but I can't imagine it's not.
Exactly. So my point is,
it's easy enough to find.
Ironically, I mean, we're inspired even after his death to read things that he.
Absolutely.
I've never read it, so I want to read it now.
And this is the thing too about this story. Again, I talk about the influence, not only about the ideas, but you know, this story was the predecessor to what the Infinity Gauntlet. You know, things like Crisis on Infinite Earths. Any of these big cosmic events. This is really the first time this happened in the medium, as far as I'm aware, is to have a multi-part story with such epic implications to an entire world.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think it's the first time you see that. And like I see, there's still stories written by that, but they all owe a little bit.
And how many Galactus stories have they done that rehashes this basic plot? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. And it all ties back. This is like the beauty of the Lee Kirby creations is that everything that is in those characters now was basically there at the beginning, and they've retconned and built upon that, but they've never kind of wiped out that foundation that those two were actually able to establish. And I'm going to talk more about Mike's pick for the Kirby or the Lee storyboard. I'm going to talk about my own pick for it, because actually this would have been my pick as well.
Right.
But one of the things about like the Silver Surfer, especially Silver Surfer, is like my second favorite character. And really, when you hear Stan Lee talk about the Silver Surfer, he says that is a 100% Kirby creation. And I'm one of those people that is in the boat that it's about 60% Kirby, it's about 40% Lee on the, you know, how much they're involved with, like, you know, Iron Man and you know, the Fantastic Four. I lean a little bit more towards the Kirby side for the creativity, but the voice that Stan Lee gave to Silver Surfer is what defines that character. And whenever you read a book like Silver Surfer 18, which was like the last of the first volume of the Silver Surfer, that was the only issue of that story arc that was actually penciled by Jack Kirby. And with the Marvel method, you know, Kirby was basically laying out the plot or the guideline for that story, and then Stan Lee would go in and put in the voice. And that is a very different Silver Surfer than what we get in the first 17 issues of that series, and for sure what we get in FF 48, 49, and 50. So we would not have the Silver Surfer we have today if it wasn't for the voice that Stan Lee, and that was, in my opinion, Stan Lee's gift, was his ability to put that voice into these characters and just make them very, very appealing and very human. It's like, we're talking about an alien character, but being a very, very human character. And it's like, it's kind of like the Superman thing. You had to have an alien to be somebody who's really, really human. Right. So Silver Surfer was a very alien individual, but very, very human, and more human than human is right. To steal the line from, was that Alien or whatever movie that was from? I don't even remember what movie that was
White
from.
Zombie, whatever.
Yeah. So that to me was Stan Lee's brilliance, was that voice that he gave to all those characters. So I'm sorry. I stole from
no,
here,
you're
so.
good. But yeah, I've said what I have to say.
Oh, okay.
So you just take it away, sir.
All right. So my second choice, I'm struggling to come up with actually a second choice. So I'm just going to go to an old standby. It's kind of hard to overlook Amazing Fantasy 15. The introduction of Spider-Man and Peter Parker. So we get that, great lesson about, using your powers responsibly. It's not exactly quoted like how people tend to quote it, and I'm not going to misquote it here. But we introduce a character. He's got those fatal flaws. He's not a popular kid. He's, drawn a little nerdy. He's still in high school, and he just gives that voice to that character that so many people can relate to. And Spider-Man is a Ditko Kirby, Lee creation. And but it's the voice of Stan Lee that he provides to that character that is so important and has defined that character, since his creation. So I don't really need to rehash the Amazing Fantasy 15 story, but it's one of the more important comics, and you look at its value. I mean, it's price guide wise, it's more valuable than FF1. Right. I mean, and it's up there with like comics like Action 1 and Detective 27, even though it is significantly a newer book than just because of how important that character is.
I think that really represents. Even though people think of the Trinity as being Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman when it comes to DC, the triumvirate of superheroes to me is Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man. I mean, Spider-Man he's just part of our culture.
Yeah, I think definitely in pop culture, it's probably seen that way. Amazing Fantasy 15 is still the only time you see the eyes through the lenses, right?
I don't know.
I feel like that was a rule for a long time,
and
I don't think they've ever shown it since. And you could definitely do that now with modern coloring techniques and everything. But I think it stands as still the only time they've done that, when he realizes the burglar is, that he let go is the one that killed Uncle Ben. I think his shock.
Because that was one of Peter's fatal flaws. Is he was just kind of stand aside and let things happen kind of guy.
Well, he was more interested in the money and the fame that he could get from his power, instead of the responsibility of having that power bore. And there's a nice moral story to that. So
and I'm really not sure how much truth there is to it, because Stan was known to embellish things sometimes. Believe it or not. But I mean, I always thought it was a brilliant touch too, and he did say this. I don't know if it was intentional or what, but he always talked about the intention of how you cannot see any part of Spider-Man's face, because then any kid could imagine himself being in that.
Right.
You know what I mean? It didn't matter if you were black or white or whatever you were.
And they've done stories since that play into that too.
So I mean, if that's true, that's brilliant. You know what I mean? But either way, still in my opinion, Spider-Man is probably the best costume in all of comics. I think his costume is definitely in the top. Oh, I don't know, just the iconography of the the three that you mentioned.
Right.
But I think Spider-Man is just a brilliant design.
Yeah, and that Spider-Man costume, I think that's pure Ditko primarily. You got some origins of the character I think are a little bit from Kirby and stuff that he did previously, and obviously the voice is Stan Lee, but the costume design is definitely Ditko.
I still miss the underarm webs.
Oh, I do too.
I wish they would bring those back. I know it's probably a pain to draw. But come on, it was it's so unique, to the character.
They for some reason want to draw those lightning lines on Flash unnecessarily. So they do the webs.
Do the webs. All right, Dan.
So for me, and kind of picking up right after Mike's story with Fantastic Four number 51, this man, this monster. So this is a story that mostly involves the Thing, who, we hear a lot about Lee and Kirby's greatest creations and things like that, and I mean, the Fantastic Four is up there, but I really feel like just the Thing specifically doesn't get enough credit. I think it's definitely one of Lee and Kirby's best creations. I feel like a lot of it probably is Kirby. The look especially is so unique to comics, but just the voice of the character and, kind of the attitude and things.
It's Lee voicing Jack Kirby.
Yeah, you know what I mean? But yeah, this is a really good story. It's just, one issue thing. And we have... Ben Grimm being the Thing, kind of, being the outcast, kind of down in the dumps, comes across this mad scientist who says he can cure him, puts him in this machine, and the mad scientist turns himself into the Thing while turning Ben Grimm back to normal, back to his human form, and he replaces Ben Grimm in the Fantastic Four. Which, how really could he get away with that with the family dynamic of that team? Yeah. But, over the course of the story, Reed gets trapped in the negative zone, and this, imposter Thing has to go in and save him. And at the end of the story, becomes the hero. He is lost in the negative zone. He sacrifices himself to save Reed. And eventually, the change wears off, and Ben Grimm becomes the Thing again, and is kind of disheartened by this. But Reed and Sue, reassure him he's part of the family. And it's a really good story, and they've done several stories since where Ben Grimm turns back into like his normal human form. I feel like it's never as poignant as it is here in this story. There's a lot of great Stan Lee stories. I'm a DC guy, but I've still read a good chunk of Stan Lee stuff. But like if I have to whittle it down, and I had to whittle quite a bit, but I'm like, I think this is it. I think this is definitely a high point of his career. I think it's just one of those stories that comes up all the time. I think this is a really, if I just have to pick one issue for me, I think it'd be this.
Well, and like the issue right after that one is another. Issue 52, first appearance of Black Panther.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Lee and Kirby both. They were at the forefront of dealing with topics like racism, and this is the first time you had a really
Can
major.
you imagine, like in 6 months, all these are out on the newsstands?
Yeah,
for sure.
Boom, 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 boom. What a great run that would be to be picking up new.
Yeah, and it's hard to overlook a book like X-Men #1, which was it's basically dealing with racism at that at that time. Just instead of black and white, it's Homo sapien versus Homo superior. So they used the medium in a way to culturally and long term make a difference in society.
Yeah. So. Side note, I just saw this the other day online. There's been a ton of news reports we've all seen come out since he passed, and I saw a headline that says Al Sharpton says Stan Lee has had more of an impact on America than Congress.
Yeah.
And just talk about what a great thing he was for race relations and his sort of anti-prejudice themes that he had throughout his work. So
yeah, again, I'm almost ashamed to say this, being a DC guy. The DC guy here. That it was 1965 or 66 when Lee and Kirby came up with Black Panther.
Yeah.
So what year was it that DC's best attempt was Tyrock?
Oh yeah.
In Legion of Superheroes.
Yeah. Well,
1973 or so.
Even Black Lightning.
Black Lightning was late 70s.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
So John Stewart was, but he was a secondary character.
Yeah.
But Stan Lee was adamant about being progressive and being equality, and that was evident.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So, Mr. DC, if you had to pick a
what's your Stan Lee
story? They got two good DC Stan Lee stories.
Just imagine.
There's a lot of truth to that. As I was informed that the topic for this podcast would be relating our favorite Stan Lee written story, I broke out into a sweat. I started digging through my short boxes. Because I'm old and I can't put them in long boxes anymore. And I found I have a handful. Most of my Marvel comics are post Stan Lee written, but because I like back issues and I buy them, I've got some Avengers and I've got some Spider-Man. But I have more Thor because Thor is my favorite DC Kirby creation. And
Lee Kirby.
DC. What I say? Lee Kirby creation.
DC on the brain.
Yeah. Can't get it out.
With those nice thin Vince Coletta ink lines.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, true.
Kirby's bold style.
Yeah, but it was really the writing that attracted me to the character and that high fantasy type. Who doesn't like that? Doth this and thou this, and I love that stuff and in any kind of media, but. I picked Thor number 129, which includes not just Thor as a mythical character of Norse origin, but also Hercules of Greek. And just for fun, they throw in Pluto, which is actually a Roman mythology. But I really like this story. Reading it is basically Thor, apparently this is midway, or they're speaking of a previous encounter between Thor and Hercules fighting, and Thor lands in New York City, and he's trying to get away from a throng of reporters, and a cabbie picks him up. And a cabbie has, I love the words of wisdom this cabbie provides Thor. Thor jumps into the cab, and the cabbie says, "Where to, pal? You name it, I'll get you there." And he tells him where. "You just sit back and relax, Curly. I'll have you there in no time." And he says, apparently the cabbie kind of sees Thor's little discombobulated. He says, "You know what? You got to excuse those rubbernecks, mister. They don't realize that you immortals can get sick of crowds just like any ordinary Joe. The way I see it, you ain't much different than a guy like me. You carry a nutty hammer and wear them wings on your hat, while I drive me a hack and wear a button on my cap." And he goes on about, and Thor goes, "You know what? You're quite the philosopher, my friend." And I thought, oh, what a great, you just wouldn't see that in many comics at the time. And it goes on to somewhat of a formulaic story, but between, there's interludes with Thor and then Hercules, and basically it's one of those deals where Hercules has to pick a champion to fight Ares, the god of the underworld, or Pluto, not Ares, that's god of war, Pluto, and he ends up picking Thor to be his champion. So I'm sorry, I can't articulate better than that. It's not one of these, this isn't on anyone's must-have list probably for comics, but it's my experience, and it represents what I loved about Stan Lee's writing, and about this character here of Thor.
Well, yeah, it's just good to have books that are fun.
Oh yeah.
For sure.
Just good to have books that are fun. No, they don't always have to be groundbreaking. You need that mix of serious, and then you need some lighthearted. And I feel like a lot of times what we've lost in comics is some of the lighthearted.
Oh, for sure. I think just with the trend towards writing for trades,
yes,
you don't get the single off fun issues anymore. It's so rare,
right?
That you get that stuff.
Yeah, we talked about that 3-issue story arc with Galactus, and that. It was groundbreaking at the time because it just didn't happen.
Right. Yes.
But now it's formulaic because of the fact that we're writing for 5 or 6 issues, not even for 3.
If they had done that Galactus story now, it'd be 12 issues minimum.
Oh, absolutely.
That would be a year's worth of stories. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, especially Stan Lee writing back then. The pace they're working at is evident in the stories. These stories move.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? And Marvel books typically are wordier due to the Stan Lee's method of writing, but they're just so fast paced back then too. They're cranking this stuff out.
At least it's dialogue and not exposition.
Yeah,
I like wordiness.
Yeah,
if
for
it's
sure.
Banter, exposition is like really gets dry.
Yeah.
All right. Does anybody have any final words of wisdom to impart before we wrap this one up?
Lee has left a legacy that will probably be unmatched.
Probably not be duplicated.
Yeah, is it even possible for someone to pull this off anymore, to do what he did back in the 60s, just with the corporate structure of everything? And, I can't see one writer writing that many books for one company anymore and having this kind of impact.
Across such a broad thing.
You know what I mean? It almost seemed like it would have to be some new startup company, and then...
And who's going to buy into that at this point?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, by the time this all happened with Lee and Kirby and creating Fantastic Four and all the other characters, Goodman and his company had pretty much sold out and had pushed the distribution over to one of another distribution outfit that DC parent company owns.
Around this time frame, this is why we had Strange Tales and Tales to Astonish because DC was basically controlling Marvel's distribution and said, you can put out 8 books a month, and that happened until 1968, which is when you got all the Captain Marvel and Submariner, and Captain America got his own title, and all those books came around about that
but some of them, I think, were some of them bi-monthly. It's kind of how they worked around that too, wasn't it?
Yeah, so they would.
So it's only 8 a month, but like maybe they had 16 books or something. Cause
it just goes to show you that they persevered, and thank goodness they did. I mean, they against all odds. Yeah. I just want to. My final words would be Excelsior, which means ever upward.
Right.
Stan got that. It's the New York State motto, and I thought, well, that's a great sentiment for representing and then giving in honor of Stan, Excelsior.
I just want to point out real quick too. I assume let's go up
pretty soon.
This weekend, it's Black Friday and then Small Business Saturday here at the store. We're doing some fundraisers for some friends of the store who lost their house into a fire. We're doing some auctions and raffling off some things. One of the items is a drawing I did of Spider-Man. I hid one of Stanley's catchphrases in the webbing if you can find it. But yeah, we're raffling that off, so come by, take a look, see if there's some stuff you're interested in maybe.
There's some good stuff, so definitely come bid.
Yeah, come bid, come check it out, and come see if we can dig around, or some of these stories we may not have in the store at this point, but we will be getting them in.
I don't know about that Thor. We probably won't get my store issue.
Hey, you know what? It's in there's a Marvel Masterworks that has that.
True,
So
I bet that's
all of those that we talked about for Stan Lee, they're all in Marvel Masterworks, and Marvel Masterworks are pretty much evergreen, right?
Yes, they are.
They are always available.
And they have gotten away from putting them in those hardcovers that are
they're very
prohibitively
expensive.
Yeah,
but
they do have paperback versions.
But that
of.
Fantastic Four run from the early issue 40 up until the Lee Kirby ends. I mean, you get Black Panther, Silver Surfer, Galactus, the Inhumans all come from right there in a very, very short time frame. Yeah. And it is well worth reading. So
very good stuff. All right. Well, if there's anything that we can help you track down with some of this stuff or get some trades in, like I said, I plan on getting those in here. This is kind of short notice to do this, but we will be getting those in here. If there's anything we haven't mentioned, come in here and request it. We can. If it's in print, we can order and get it in here for you. So just come on in here. Again, we're at Campus Comics. We're at 816B East Main Street. Phone number is 618-457-6011. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on that. Dan runs the Twitter side of it, which is at campus_comics.
Yep.
Yeah, is our Twitter handle. So follow us on that. And stay up to date on what we got. And Scott, your info, sir?
Yeah, Scott Reed, you can find me at burgcomics.com, burgcomics.com. It has links to Instagram and Facebook and eBay store. So if you can't find it at Campus Comics, feel free to shoot me an email.
And Dan Brown, you can find me online on Twitter, DeviantArt, and WordPress at Detective651.
And I'm pretty much
Are you?
I'm invisible, social media invisible when it comes. I have a Twitter account that I use just for watching and just checking things out, but I don't really contribute. I'm a consumer, not a contributor. But I have a Facebook account that's sort of locked down because of my job. But I am listed as a friend on the Campus Comics Facebook page, and if anybody did for some reason want to reach out to me, I've got comics for sale too. If anybody wants, you can go through Mike No here at Campus Comics.
All right. Well, I guess that'll do it for this special Stan Lee centric podcast here for Campus Comics Cast. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you soon.